If it's Wednesday, the Supreme Court's latest move on abortion, as the court buys itself a little time after the Justice Department urges the justices to act to prevent restrictions on medication abortion from going into effect. Plus, out-trumping Ron DeSantis, the former president racks up support from Florida Republicans, even as DeSantis meets with Republicans in Washington and hits the road in a primary state push. And the administration's top intel officials head to Capitol Hill to brief every lawmaker in Congress as more revelations surface from that major breach of Pentagon secrets. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the Supreme Court has just bought itself a few more days in a case that could have wide-ranging impact on access to a commonly used abortion pill. This afternoon, the court announced it was extending its administrative stay on restrictions around mifepristone. The stay was originally going to expire at midnight. The court has now delayed that decision by 2 days to midnight Friday, meaning the drug will remain available during that time. Now, it comes as the justices are considering both whether to take up the decision by a federal judge in Texas that would have pulled mifepristone off the shelves entirely, and the appeals court ruling that would have kept the pill in circulation with some heavy restrictions. The DOJ weighed in again last night, arguing the partial stay would create regulatory chaos. Now, the White House has also continued to message to the public about the president's commitment to fighting for abortion access, with White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre telling reporters today the president is prepared for all outcomes from the high court.
This is a high priority. We're clearly keeping a close eye on this and what decisions may come down from this. Look, as we know, as you just mentioned, the stay will expire tonight, and we are prepared. We are prepared for any outcome the Supreme Court may issue, and we are prepared for a long legal fight if necessary. That is the commitment that this president, this administration has made, and we are going to continue to protect women's reproductive rights. That is something that we have said since the Dowd decision came down this past summer in June.
Meanwhile, the plaintiffs weighed in again yesterday, asking the court to uphold the appeals court restrictions. The high court's ultimate decision could have far-reaching implications for abortion access, even in states where abortion remains legal, and could once again have far-reaching political fallout. Now, before the administrative stay expires on Friday, the court could go down one of three roads: allow the appeals court's partial stay to go into effect, deny the partial stay and send the case back to the Fifth Circuit, or decide to take up the case and grant the stay in the interim. Or the court could punt the decision even further down the road. I'm joined by NBC senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett, NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, SCOTUS blog co-founder Amy Howe, and Dr. Bhavik Kumar, co-chair of the Committee to Protect Healthcare's Reproductive Freedom Task Force and a Texas-based abortion provider. Thank you to all of you for starting us off. Laura, break this down. What did the court decide here? What are the implications?
So Justice Alito has issued this order essentially giving the court a little bit more time, 2 more days to try to figure out what it wants to do here. And the big question is why? Why are they in need of a little bit more time? Is it because one or more of the justices is writing a vigorous dissent? Or is it because this case is just super complicated, which it is, and it has this sort of morass of regulations and the interplay between a lot of different conflicting rules here. And so maybe they just need a little bit more time to make sure they're getting it right. We don't know why, but it's clear that it is not as straightforward as one might think, and certainly as the Justice Department was hoping that the court would see it as sort of an easy one. It's clearly not for this court, and we just don't yet know why. But as you laid out, there are a lot of different paths they could take here, and just because they have bought themselves 2 more days, I don't think we should read into that one way or another what the ultimate outcome will be.
And Laura, just to follow up on that point, I kind of mapped out the various different options before the justices. Are those still consistent with your understanding of what their options are ahead of Friday?
I think that those still hold. I think that, certainly the Justice Department wants a full stay, meaning that access to the pill would be maintained. The case would go back down to the Fifth Circuit, as you said. But essentially, we would be in the position we are right now. The case would just live in front of the Fifth Circuit. But the department has said, and the pill manufacturer have also argued, that if for whatever reason the court is not inclined to do that full stay, which is what they want, then they should grab the case for themselves and hear it on an expedited basis right now before the summer recess. And it's not clear that they would do that, but that's another scenario. That's the only other option that we haven't talked about that they could do. But again, I think that the main three that you laid out still hold.
All right, Laura Jarrett, we don't know when you sleep or when you take a break, but we appreciate your being here very much.
Not Friday night, I'll tell you that.
Exactly. Laura, thank you so much for being here again to help us understand this very complicated case. Yamiche, let me turn to you. We have not heard from the president, but you heard what Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had to say. They're obviously watching this very closely and prepared to respond when there is a final decision.
They are. And I think in some ways this underscores all this chaos, all this wait and pause and a new deadline. It really underscores what the Biden administration's argument is, which is the minute that women's reproductive health becomes a courtroom issue, it creates chaos. There are women that are wondering, can I get this access to this pill? Should I be stockpiling this pill if I'm someone who's a pharmacy? So this is really, I think, underscoring what the Biden administration is going to say. And I can imagine that, of course, they're waiting, watching very closely to see, because as Laura said, that all of the options are on the table for the Supreme Court. And if they side with opponents of abortion rights, if they say that women can't get this pill by the mail, that you have to wait longer in your pregnancy, or should say wait lower in your pregnancy, meaning 7 weeks, if they say that all of these things that the FDA approved, that's something that the court is now saying is not is problematic, this is going to be the Biden administration saying, I think based on our reporting, we can say this pretty clearly, this shows that this is a court that is in some ways, in their mind, politicized, because they are overturning scientific evidence. They're overturning scientific decisions. So all of this chaos is not good, I think, for someone who's trying to say, we don't want to have this continue to be a back and forth thing in the court.
Absolutely. And the legality of it is so complex, the politics so complex, and I'm going to delve more deeply into that with you in just a moment, Yamiche. Amy, let me turn to you. What do you make of the fact that the court has now bought itself 2 more days? Laura made the point, we don't know why this delay.
We don't know what the delay is, but the fact that it bought itself another delay is in and of itself kind of unusual. The fact that Justice Alito last week granted this initial administrative stay wasn't that surprising. They were moving very quickly, and this is a complicated case. And so it wasn't surprising for Justice Alito to issue this order that said, we're going to buy ourselves a couple of more days to act and to get some briefs in, and we'll decide the case theoretically by Wednesday, by tonight. But for them to turn around and say, we can't actually do it by Wednesday night, we need 2 more days to do it, is unusual. So it suggests that there's something strange going on behind the scenes, that as Laura said, someone is writing something. Maybe someone's trying to broker a compromise. We just don't know, and we won't know until Friday night. We thought we were going to be up late tonight. Now we're going to be up late Friday night.
That's exactly right. We did think we were going to be up late. As Yamiche laid out, the White House has insisted they are confident in the Biden administration, in their legal arguments. They've not surprisingly expressed confidence. They think that the court will ultimately decide in their favor. And they make the point that, look, you can't compare this to Dobbs, because the question before Dobbs was, should the issue of abortion go back to the states? This is a very different question that relates to a drug that was approved by the FDA 20 years ago. You could assume that the liberal justices would agree with them. What are you watching for, though? Where are the real wild cards here?
So there are 2 separate issues, and the Biden administration in its briefing says, this is about an agency making a decision based on science. We can't find another case in which a federal court has overturned the agency's approval of a drug, let alone after 20 years. And there are 2 separate issues. And one of the issues is, do these challengers have the right to be in court at all? And it sounds like a technical issue, but if they don't, then the whole case goes away. And the Biden administration says it's so speculative, because the challenger's argument is that, we might have to treat someone who has come in with complications. They say even though the chances of complications, the Biden administration says, are so small, we might have to treat someone against our conscience. And there's a whole chain that has to happen. And so they say that their standing arguments are strong, and then they believe that their arguments on the merits, that this drug should have been the FDA was right to approve this drug, and then to approve the further conditions on access. That those conditions are also so strong. They feel very strongly about their arguments.
Dr. Kumar, let me turn to you and just get your reaction to this 2-day delay in an ultimate decision. And you just heard Amy kind of lay out what she is watching. What are you most concerned about at this very moment?
Yeah, I mean, here we are 10 months after Roe was overturned, waiting for the Supreme Court to make another decision that's been delayed another 2 days. The roller coasters continue, and people trying to access care are still scrambling. We have 18 states that have some kind of abortion ban. People had appointments today, whether in person or via telehealth. People have appointments on Friday and next week. And people are continuing to be confused, and there's chaos in trying to access this care. And it's really, really unfortunate. I don't think any physician or healthcare provider should be going into their clinic or work and think, am I going to be able to take care of the people that need me today? Well, I have to tell them we're not able to provide this care. And it's really unethical that courts are making these decisions that impact people every single day, that they are delaying care for people, and that care is being taken away from people day by day. It's also important to note that this is not about mifepristone. It's not about the health and safety. This case should not be even where it is today. This is purely political and ideological, and it's really unfortunate. And
Dr. Kumar, we should remind our viewers, you are there in Texas. I mean, you are really at the ground zero of where this is being argued. Can you paint a picture for us of what this has meant for you, what it's meant for your patients, and if mifepristone is restricted, would you feel comfortable recommending the one-step dose for patients who are seeking to terminate a pregnancy?
Yeah, so in Texas, we've had an abortion ban for at least 10 months, and before that, we were under SB 8. So we've been living in a restrictive environment for some time. But when we ban abortion, it doesn't stop the need for it. So people have continued to need access to this care. They've traveled to other states and accessed abortion care via other means. We know that there is a safe alternative using misoprostol alone. However, that regimen can sometimes come with more intense side effects and more prolonged side effects. And so it's really a different process. And what I worry about is we're taking away the option from patients for them to decide what's best for them. And we also have to think about the landscape where there are 18 states that have a ban on abortion. Politicians are getting more aggressive with abortion bans, and people are scared about traveling with medications across state lines, about accessing care in an emergency if it were to occur, disclosing this information. And so it's really just making this landscape for pregnant people scarier and harsher, and it should be the opposite.
Amy, let me go back to you, because this is being decided against the backdrop of a high court that has been under increased scrutiny for a range of reasons, both, of course, the leak ahead of Dobbs, signaling how the court was going to decide. And now we have these ethical questions surrounding Justice Clarence Thomas. How is that impacting this moment and how people perceive the high court?
That is, the court has been in the spotlight for over a year now with the Dobbs argument and the decision and the SB 8 case. And it is another, onslaught of unwelcome attention for the justices. And this is a really hard one to deal with. Justice Thomas put out a statement in response to the initial article by ProPublica saying that this was personal hospitality by Harlan Crow. And there's some debate about, perhaps the lodging and the food. But, I think that the private jet travel, for example, and the yacht travel is harder. I'm not sure that is a gray area. And then there's been another article by ProPublica about the purchase of property that was not disclosed. And that's not a gray area. There hasn't been a statement from the court or from Justice Thomas. And, I don't think that the attention on these ethical problems is going to go away anytime soon. I think that the best case scenario is that it's a distraction, but the court's public approval ratings were already at their lowest, in years because of the Dobbs decision and the leak. And this is really not helping, to put it mildly.
Yeah, it's a really great distillation of that. Yet another data point as people are increasingly scrutinizing the high court. Yamiche, let me just give you the final thought here about the politics of this, which are so complicated. If you look at the polling, the majority of Americans, 46% of Republicans, believe the pill mifepristone should be available where abortion is legal. Democrats, the president has said he is going to campaign on this. We saw that in the midterm elections. Republicans have been struggling to find their messaging on this. Could this moment have significant reverberations into the next election cycle?
I mean, this is the biggest abortion case to come before the Supreme Court since Dobbs. This will certainly have reverberations no matter what happens and how the Supreme Court rules, because it really is yet again another point to say that our country is arguing about women's health care in the courts. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is the Biden administration continues to underscore that whatever happens with mifepristone, this is going to have broad implications for the pharmaceutical industry. And what we're not talking about right now, because we're so focused on abortion, is that there are a lot of politically fraught issues with how scientific research is conducted, with the way that embryos or fetuses are used in science and research. And I can imagine that whatever happens here will have another sort of effect on that. So when you talk to people, women in particular, who are looking at this, people are worried about, what about my Alzheimer's drug? What about my cancer drug that people might see as connected to the abortion movement? So there's a lot of worry out there, and definitely a lot of political consequences, because Republicans are getting a lot of wins, but they're struggling with messaging, and Democrats are seeing some losses, but they're able to mobilize and galvanize their voters.
Yeah. Fantastic conversation. Thank you for starting us off on such a big day. Yamiche, Amy, Dr. Kumar, Laura beforehand, we really appreciate it. Coming up, Democrats' dilemma as the debate over Senator Dianne Feinstein's role in the Senate heats up. I'll talk to a House Democrat who says it's time for the California lawmaker to step aside. That's next. Plus, feuds, frontrunners, and Florida. We have the very latest on the Republican primary race as the Trump campaign racks up endorsements and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis hits the road, struggling to gain momentum. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are following a number of developments from both chambers of Congress today. House Republicans are now offering to raise the debt limit by $1.5 trillion or until next March, whichever comes first. It would, among other things, cap budget growth at 1% a year, claw back unspent COVID money, repeal 87,000 IRS agents, and add new work requirements for government aid. It's the first official proposal Speaker McCarthy has put forward to avoid a potential default by the federal government on its debt. Take a listen.
House Republicans are taking action to lift the debt limit, to limit government spending, save taxpayers money, and grow the economy. President Biden and Senator Schumer have no right to play politics with the debt calling. Their extreme positions risk provoking the very crisis they claim to want to avoid.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, meanwhile, says he will introduce a resolution to replace Dianne Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee temporarily with Ben Cardin, even though Republicans have vowed to block it. Feinstein's continued absence from the Senate has not only stalled Democrats' efforts to confirm President Biden's judicial nominees, it's also forced Democrats to decide how much pressure Feinstein, the oldest sitting senator, should face to potentially resign. I'm joined now by Congressman Dean Phillips, Democrat from Minnesota. He is one of just a few Democrats who have called for Senator Feinstein to resign. And before we get to that, Congressman, I want to thank you for being here. And I also want to get your reaction to the ruling that just came down from the Supreme Court on mifepristone, essentially kicking the can down the road until Friday.
Well, Kristen, good to be with you. And, once again, we're seeing an abhorrence of justice. It's clearly a pharmaceutical that's effective, it's safe, it has been for many, many years. And the intervention of the judiciary to begin with is deeply troubling. We are a nation that often kicks the can down the road. I'm hopeful that this will be resolved, but we have to get to the source of the real problem here, which is a political judge in this case making a decision that deeply affects the health care of millions of women.
Were you surprised?
That's what's troubling.
Were you surprised that the court pushed this stay until Friday and didn't just make some type of determination?
Well, I think there's a there. We're not sure exactly what it is, but that's still just a few days from now. And like I said, I'm hopeful that they'll do the right thing. But I surely understand why many are suspicious.
Okay, Congressman, let's turn to your calls for Senator Feinstein to resign. As you know, a number of your colleagues have said that she has earned the right to make that decision when she is ready in her own time. What do you say to them?
Well, what I say first is Senator Feinstein's a remarkable American. Her service is extraordinary. But this is not about us. This is about our country. And we have a crisis of honesty in Congress. I think that's fair to say. And I'm tired of serving with people who say one thing privately and refuse to say the same thing publicly. And I call on all my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, frankly, to hold ourselves more highly accountable. This is not about her battle with shingles. It's not about her age. We have a number of aged members of Congress who are wonderfully effective. This is about competency. And I know those who serve most closely with her are aware of exactly what I'm speaking about. It has consequences. She's remarkable, but this is not a culture, a Congress that should be protecting our own at the expense of our country. And that's, I'm afraid, where we're heading right now.
You say something interesting, which is the folks who are willing to speak out privately but not publicly. And so it begs the question, have you heard from some of your colleagues in the Senate who say to you, yes, I agree with what you're saying, but I'm not prepared to say it publicly. I'm not prepared to say it out loud.
Absolutely. Yes.
How many would you say? How many would you say?
Countless. Kristen, if you took a survey of those in the Congress, both the House and Senate, on this subject, I know what the results would be, and my colleagues know. But we have a culture of protecting ourselves at the expense of the country, and that's happening once again.
And countless senators, just to be clear, Congressman, countless senators?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Okay, are you prepared to name any of them here?
No, I'm not going to out other people. They know who they are.
Okay, let me play for you something that former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had to say about this, and then I want to get your reaction on the other side.
She deserves the respect to get well and be back on duty. And it's interesting to me. I don't know what political agendas are at work that are going after Senator Feinstein in that way. I've never seen them go after a man who was sick in the Senate in that way. What
say you about what Nancy Pelosi had to say?
Well, I also have deep respect for former Speaker Pelosi, but I disagree with her on this. This is not about sexism or about man or woman. This is about general competency. It's not about being a Democrat or Republican. It's about doing the right thing. And I'm disappointed, frankly, in that comment. I think it's unfair. You know that my colleague Ro Khanna, a member of the California delegation, went first. I wasn't going to do this first, even though I felt this for some time. And again, this goes to a deeper problem, Kristen, about members of Congress being honest. I think that's why we have such, frankly, low expectations and low approval ratings, is because there are so few here that are willing, like I said, to say publicly what we all talk about privately. I'm tired of it. I didn't come here to play by the old rules and only on one team. I came to play for our team, which is all of us, and that's America.
So what's your message to Democratic leadership? Do you think that they should be leading the charge? Do you expect their current standpoint to change at any point? Do you expect that to happen?
Well, it's not members of the House's job to tell senators what to do. That's never well received. I think it's incumbent on members of the Senate, particularly Democrats, to be honest. In fact, I think it's more respectful to Senator Feinstein to find a thoughtful exit. I'm afraid that people around her, the closest people to her, might be looking after their own interests, not the country's. And I think that's their job. And by the way, I think if Congress would start doing this, more Democrats and Republicans, we might just reestablish some faith in government, which is my mission. This isn't about hurting people's feelings, but sometimes it has to be done in the spirit of doing better for a country that really deserves it and needs it.
Congressman, let me ask you about Speaker McCarthy's proposal to increase the debt limit. Have you had a chance to review it yet? And is it something that you would support? Would you encourage the president to make a deal?
Well, first of all, it's irresponsible to even threaten taking the country over the fiscal cliff. We cannot default on our debt. My Republican colleagues know that. I know they know that. That said, I'm pleased that there's finally an opening volley. But let me get to the real nitty-gritty here. To actually rescind the dollars that we allocated to the IRS results in the loss of probably hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue that we will not be able to fulfill, but that should be paid. And that's why we're making these investments. So I find it quite ironic and somewhat amazing and shocking that here Mr. McCarthy would present a plan that would actually reduce the very revenue that we need to try to balance the budget. And if I could say one more thing, Kristen, the debt is one thing, but we're about to spend over $600 billion a year on the debt service, the interest, which means that we are spending more on the past than we are investing in the future. It's nonsense. Nobody can operate like this for long. So both sides are right here. Democrats, we're right. We can't go over the fiscal cliff. It's nonsense. Republicans are joining with a lot of we Democrats in recognizing that we have to budget differently and get our fiscal house in order. Two things can be true at once.
Given the urgency that you just laid out, given that you said, look, at least this is an opening gambit, should President Biden invite Speaker McCarthy to the White House and hammer out a deal? Is it time to negotiate?
To me, it's antithetical in a democracy to not negotiate. That's what we do here. This entire
institution.
So that's a
yes?
The answer is yes, but I also want to point out the Problem Solvers Caucus. We just introduced a very thoughtful resolution to this whole impasse today that appoints a bipartisan, bicameral commission to investigate ways that we can do this better. Regular order for budgeting, ensure that we get our fiscal house in order. That's what we should be doing anyway. It shouldn't take an act of Congress, if you will, to get that done. But I want to see negotiation. But I do agree with the president, Kristen, to use the debt ceiling and the potential to default on our debt as leverage is not just nonsensical, it's just damn right dangerous and foolish. And that's what troubles me.
Congressman, let me just ask you finally about 2024.
Sure.
You said last July that there should be a new generation of Democratic leaders, and in February you called it absurd that Democrats weren't promoting a challenger to President Biden in 2024. Do you stand by that, and who would you like the challenger to be?
Absolutely, I stand by it. You know, I listen to people every day, and we all think the same thing. We are a country predicated on competition. We need competition inside both Democratic and the Republican parties, and we need competition for the Democratic and Republican parties. We should not be a country that protects a duopoly and prevents political competition.
Who would you like to see challenge the president?
I want to see, Kristen, I want to see as many thoughtful, energized, articulate, young Democrats, middle-aged, even old Democrats, share that stage, share their ideas, their perspectives, because when we have competitions, the best win. That's what America's all about. We should do that in politics like we do in business and every other category. I think Joe Biden has done a spectacular job. I honor him. He's a man of integrity, competency, and compassion. But nobody in this country in particular should be anointed as our next president. We need competition.
I can't let you go until I get a name. Give me one name, and would it be Dean Phillips?
This is not about Dean Phillips. This is about people like Amy Klobuchar and Gina Raimondo and governors around the country, and maybe names that you don't even know of. Sharing that stage and sharing ideas for the future, that's what I care about deeply. It's not about demeaning President Biden. It's not about demeaning Senator Feinstein. It's simply competition is good, and I think it's time for a new generation to at least share the stage, if not take it.
Congressman Dean Phillips, thank you so much. I really appreciate your
Thank you, Kristen.
Answering all of my questions. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Coming up next, Florida Governor DeSantis hits the road in the key primary state of South Carolina as President Biden takes aim at so-called MAGA Republicans. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning to the 2024 campaign trail, Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is in South Carolina today holding events ostensibly to promote his book in a state that just happens to hold an early 2024 primary contest. He was here in the nation's capital yesterday meeting with lawmakers ahead of a potential presidential bid, but his trip may have been overshadowed after meeting with DeSantis. Texas Republican Congressman Lance Gooden announced his support for Donald Trump, tweeting, quote, "While DeSantis has done commemorable work in Florida, there's no doubt in my mind that President Trump is the only leader who can save America from the leftist onslaught we are currently facing." According to Politico, several lawmakers tried to downplay their meetings with DeSantis, claiming they only met with him because they wanted to say hello to a former colleague. Perhaps looking to steal DeSantis' thunder, Trump unveiled several endorsements from the Florida congressional delegation the week the governor went to Washington. All told, 50% of the Florida House members have pledged their support to Trump at this point. Joining me now on set is Meredith McGraw, national political correspondent for Politico, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino, as well as an NBC News contributor, and Lonnie Chen, director of domestic political studies at Stanford University, fellow at the Hoover Institution, and a former advisor to Mitt Romney. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Meredith, let me start with you. Here DeSantis was in Washington this week, hoping to essentially get the spotlight back from former President Trump. And here you have all of these endorsements going to the former president. Did he do anything to gain momentum this week?
Yeah, this visit by DeSantis here in D.C. didn't go as planned for him. Yesterday, Trump and his campaign rolled out a bunch of new endorsements from the Florida delegation, and now 10 of the 20 Republicans in the House, Florida House, have endorsed DeSantis. And I think it shows a few things. For one, a lot of these statements that the members came out with noted how little interaction they've had with DeSantis as governor. I think it shows the organization of the Trump campaign, which I think has been surprising considering how things have gone in the past. And I think it also shows the real challenge DeSantis faces by not officially announcing yet. His super PAC is ostensibly running his campaign right now. There are rules about contact between the two. And I think that's just going to continue to create some challenges for him as he tries to gain momentum ahead of any potential announcement.
Lonnie, Meredith makes a really important point, which is that there are all of these reports that DeSantis is not doing the politicking of politicking. And Congressman Stubbe said of his endorsement that basically he hadn't heard from Ron DeSantis, and yet he had heard from Trump that DeSantis has never reached out to him personally, even after an accident. And yet he heard from former President Trump, and that factored into his decision. Is he missing the mark on that point? Does he have to learn that lesson now if he's serious about running?
Well, I think the lesson they've got to learn is organization matters, and they have to put in place the right organization to compete in a primary. Yeah. Now, the rules have changed since 2012 when I last worked in a competitive primary in a really deep way, but nonetheless, what you see is the Trump campaign has an organization. They're in the states. They're understanding the political moves on the chessboard. I think the challenge for other Republicans is they're going to have to build that infrastructure, and it's getting late. It's April, and they're doing a lot of stuff now in these super PACs and outside groups, which wasn't always the way it was done. Usually you'd have a campaign, and the campaign would execute on that strategy. So I think you're right that Governor DeSantis and others are going to have to begin to think seriously about what do we need to do to build an organization to compete, not just the media game, but actually the political game.
Right. Maria Teresa, let me play for you what Senator John Cornyn had to say after meeting with DeSantis and get your reaction.
To me, the most important thing in the 2024 presidential primary is for Republicans to nominate somebody who can win. Most important thing to me is winning the election. It doesn't do you much good to come in second, and because you can't set the agenda, you can't pursue your policy agenda. And so I think people want to get behind somebody who they are confident can win in 2024.
I played that for you because typically we hear Democrats say that.
Right.
And now you're hearing more and more Republicans
backpedaling.
Hey, wait a minute. We need to win in 2024.
Well, and just as important is that he's coming from the place and the perch of being from Texas. And in Texas, Trump did incredibly well. For him to divorce himself from the top of the ticket that basically helped ensure that he was there as well is almost sacrilegious, so to speak. But I think the challenge with DeSantis is also that he's also not doing his politics right by talking to the media. He doesn't. He likes the photo ops, but he doesn't sit down and have conversations. And when you have the Financial Times verbally state that there are donors within his realm that are going to defect and go to Trump, then you know that his campaign is in trouble before it's even started.
Well, and when you look at the polls, I mean, that's, again, it is very early, so we don't want to overstate anything that we're seeing in the polls. And yet, we are at this moment where former President Trump has now been indicted, Meredith, and you're seeing him increase in the polls, at least the latest round of polls show him increasing over Ron DeSantis. Is there a point at which it becomes too late for him to regain this momentum? Or is it too early to say that?
Well, I think what's going to be very hard for DeSantis and, frankly, any other Republican that gets in or has gotten in is just how strong Trump's poll is with his base. He has this sort of floor of 30% or so of Republican voters who are going to stick with him no matter what. And how you break away from that, especially in some of these primary states where it's winner takes all, that could be a real challenge.
I want to play something that Asa Hutchinson, who is in the race, who's distinguishing himself from former President Trump, told our Vaughn Hilliard, and get everyone's reaction.
Why does the party need to move on from Donald Trump?
Because Donald Trump has taken us back to bitterness. He's taken us back to, what's a personal vendetta. Whenever you look at what he wants to do as president, it's more about getting even with his political enemies than leading our country, and that concerns me.
Lonnie, he talks about the need to move on from Trump. He's the only candidate saying that, though. I mean, no one is taking the gloves off.
I mean, everything he said is true, and it would matter a lot more if others said it. And I mean, I think Asa Hutchinson's a great guy. He was a terrific governor. But for this argument to really get liftoff, you're going to have Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott make the argument more directly. Now, it may not be in their dispositions to do so, but the reality is, if you're going to take down Donald Trump, you've got to go at him directly. I really don't see this kind of sidestepping and, well, maybe he'll blow himself up. I think these strategies have proven to be failed strategies.
Maria Teresa.
Well, I think the challenge is that Asa Hutchinson is absolutely, he sounds more like a Democrat, moderate Democrat now than he does the Republican Party. And if it was just him going toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, then he would have a better chance. But this idea that there's going to be basically 3 or 4 other candidates that are all kind of the same shades against Donald Trump, he doesn't have the base. This conversation does not work for a primary race. It does, though, on a national stage.
I want to get all of your reaction to the Fox News settlement. And the reason why it's interesting, not only because there was so much attention on the settlement itself, but because effectively Fox was carrying the water for then President Trump, Meredith. And the question is, former president has not in any way faced ramifications for the mistruths that were, for example, put out on Fox, that Fox has acknowledged. How does this inform voters, do you think, heading into this election cycle? Does it? Does it have any impact?
Well, it certainly had an impact on Fox News.
Yes, it did.
$750 million is a lot of money, maybe more than that. It's a lot of money. You know, there was some disappointment that with this settlement, Fox wasn't forced to come on air and make a correction, that there wasn't any full culpability for them in pushing some of these falsehoods. But, you know, for Dominion, they're getting a very large payout here with this settlement. And I think both sides were making, frankly, business decisions for Fox News that they get to avoid more embarrassment. But in terms of how this plays with voters, you know, it might force Fox to pull back. But, you know, right now it does seem a lot of these falsehoods are really ingrained in a lot of Republican voters' minds.
Lonnie, what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that voters who believed the so-called big lie will now take a second look, or is it ingrained?
I mean, I don't think it's going to make one iota of difference in terms of, because there's a level of loyalty, I think you find, that folks who supported the former president, where they get their news, how they get their news, how they consume news. I think there's a set of patterns there that are set, and I'm not sure that anything about the settlement or about the lawsuit changes that.
Yeah, I think it's the bigger challenge is that what we're seeing is that Americans increasingly are consuming their news in a balkanized fashion.
Right.
So even though there's a big headline of how much in the hundreds of millions of dollars they had to settle, their Fox viewer may never know about it. And I think that's where the rub is. So I think part of what would have been a win for the Fourth Estate, for the press, would have for Fox News to have to apologize for misleading and for lying to their public.
All right. Great conversation, you guys, covering a lot of topics. We really appreciate it. Meredith, Maria, and Lonnie, thank you. Coming up after the break, we are live on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers are being briefed this afternoon by the Biden administration on the fallout from that major Pentagon documents leak. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Questions continue to swirl around Jack Teixeira, the 21-year-old airman accused of leaking top-secret Pentagon documents. Today, top intelligence chief Avril Haines and senior administration officials are briefing lawmakers about the leaks. Moments ago, the chair and vice chair on the Senate Intel Committee spoke about what they heard from those officials.
That the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies found out about it primarily from the press. I certainly wasn't satisfied with any plans they have in place to prevent this from happening in the future.
I think there are a whole host of questions here, from access to internal security controls to making sure how we really make sure continuous vetting in an internet-driven age actually can spot anomalies.
Today, the Air Force suspended the Guardsman's unit from its intelligence mission, pending an investigation into those leaks. And joining me now from Capitol Hill is Ryan Nobles. Ryan, thanks so much for being here. So just based on what we heard from lawmakers, they were not satisfied with what they heard. What are you hearing from folks on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, Kristen, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. And part of it has to do with the fact that the administration is still pretty early into this investigation, into these leaked documents. So they don't know that much that they can share with the members of Congress. But what you do is, and, you know, the sound you just played there from the two members of the Intelligence Committee, Rubio and Warner, really show kind of where we're headed when it comes to this conversation about classified documents. Members of Congress are getting increasingly frustrated that it seems like every other day there's a new classified document scandal of some ilk, of documents being in the hands of people that shouldn't have them, and that the whole process needs some sort of an overhaul. It needs to be updated for the internet age. It needs to be updated in terms of what is and is not classified, and it needs to be updated in terms of who gets access to this material. So this is just the beginning of what will probably be a lengthy conversation here with members of Congress, but it's pretty safe to say they've been dissatisfied with the amount of information that they've got from the administration.
And, you know, Ryan, I had a chance to interview Congressman Quigley and LaHood yesterday. They are putting forth a bipartisan proposal that would essentially enforce some real penalties, civil penalties, for mishandling classified documents. Are you getting a sense that there is momentum around that legislation, and is there bipartisan support for addressing this issue in a unified fashion?
You know, it's hard to say with that bill specifically because it's in its early stages of making its way through Congress. But I do think, Kristen, that you are getting a bipartisan consensus that reform is needed. I think the issue right now, for Congress at least, is that they haven't been able to get their arms fully around the root of the problem. And with each passing controversy, there seems to be a new issue that needs to be addressed. And so before I think any sort of tangible legislation emerges that really has the opportunity to pass both houses of Congress and get signed into law, there needs to be kind of a fulsome understanding of all the problems that are associated with the classification system. And it seems as though we're just at the beginning of that investigation. And, you know, the problem, Kristen, is that this is moving ahead at light speed. The technology is changing so quickly. It's like so many things Congress is confronting. And so that's what these members of Congress are dealing with right now.
Yeah, the technology undoubtedly a big part of what makes this so challenging to confront. Ryan Nobles, thank you so much for your reporting. Really appreciate it. Still to come, the state of U.S. Israel relations as Israeli leaders navigate growing tensions over a controversial judicial overhaul the White House wants scrapped. And as House Speaker McCarthy prepares to address Israel's Knesset as part of a historic bipartisan trip, Israel's former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, will be on set with me. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Speaker McCarthy announced his first trip abroad as Speaker of the House. He will visit Israel, where he will make an historic address to Parliament. Meantime, tensions continue between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden over Israel's judicial overhaul plan. Netanyahu hit pause on the plan last month, but he's not abandoning it, even as protests continue in Israel. He told Chuck this weekend he wants to reach a broad consensus on how to balance the power of the court. And Axios is reporting the U.S. is trying to reassure Israel after classified Pentagon documents tied to Israel appeared online, with Secretary of Defense Austin reportedly telling his Israeli counterpart the U.S. is taking steps to prevent future leaks. Joining me now on set is former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister, for being here. Appreciate it.
Great to be here, Kristen.
I want to start off by asking you about the leaks and the fallout from the leaks. Do you believe that Israel can trust the U.S. intelligence community, or has that relationship been fractured?
Israel can trust the United States Intelligence Committee. We're working a lot together. And things happen on both sides of the ocean, and we understand, and America clearly is taking care of this issue. It's never pleasant, but we're going to move on.
Okay, let me ask you about the judicial reform proposal. And there were some leaks around that Mossad was encouraging officials to protest the judicial plans. Your reaction to that, is that
Of course, that's
okay?
baseless. The Mossad has no intervention whatsoever in the domestic politics of Israel, full stop, period.
It's interesting because you indicated to PBS News that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has effectively pulled the plan to overhaul the judiciary. Is that true? How do you see the state of his plan right now?
Well, I think the big news is that democracy in Israel has prevailed. And Israel is now going to be celebrating its 75th birthday, and we got a great gift, the gift of democracy and freedom. By the way, both sides of the aisle, we all agree that we want a stronger democracy. The question is how we go about that. I think it's now clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu will not proceed unilaterally on this reform. He will go ahead only with consensus. Now, whilst he's not saying it for political reasons, I think it would be a fair representation of what's really going on.
What do you think consensus would look like? And do you think ultimately it would give the government more control over the judiciary?
Well, the overwhelming majority of Israelis agree on a few things. We all agree there is a need for a reform, and we all agree we need to do it in agreement, in consensus. We also agree that the Supreme Court of Israel does not really fairly represent the variety of opinions in Israel, and that needs to be fixed. And we also agree that over the past 3 decades, the Supreme Court, as a constitutional court, has usurped some of the authorities of the executive in a way that ought not have been. So now we just have to balance it. And I think the general feeling, and Prime Minister Netanyahu himself conceded, that the government went too strong, too fast, and it wasn't only about the content, it was also about the form. It wasn't done well, and now they're going to try and fix it.
Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu can reach this consensus for this proposal to overhaul the judiciary, the Supreme Court, given that he is facing his own legal challenges?
I think regardless of that, it's going to be tough to reach an agreement. I'm not sure there will be an agreement.
You're skeptical, I hear in your voice.
It's tough because there's a lack of trust. Both sides don't trust each other, and that's not unnatural in a democracy between coalition and opposition. I don't think the Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to progress this reform because of his personal issues. I think it was sort of a mishap, and he was sort of cornered into this mess.
Do you think that the longer that the debate over this potential reform drags on, does it risk undermining the security of the country, given the protests that we're seeing?
Well, I'd say this. Israel is going to be stronger for this whole crisis because it forced us to face a few tough realities down the road of the future of Israel's demography and domestic demography and other big questions. So it's effectively forcing us to become stronger and a stronger democracy in the long term. However, you're right. In the short term, this cloud of uncertainty will not be removed until the government says explicitly we will continue the reform only in consensus. And I do urge the government to do that.
Let me ask you about the new settlements in the West Bank. The Biden administration, as you know, has expressed deep concerns. Are you concerned that new Israeli settlements could undermine long-term security and stability?
No, I think what we're seeing over the past several decades is natural development in Judea and Samaria, a.k.a. the West Bank. There's the Palestinian-controlled area, and there's no settlements there, what's called Areas A and B. All of the Jewish communities being built and homes are only in the Israeli-controlled area, what's called Area C.
Does it undermine, though, you talk about the strength of the democracy, could it undermine your democracy in the long term?
I don't think so, because effectively the big majority of Palestinians, roughly 2 million Palestinians, they enjoy full self-governance. The PA holds its own elections when it decides to. They pay their own taxes. They run their own roads and give their own education. So we're not in the business of governing. The majority of Israelis does not want to govern them, so we're not going to change that. I think the main path forward is in reducing the degree of this crisis, of this conflict. So sort of shrinking the conflict as we go.
Let me ask you about President Biden. He has not yet extended an invitation to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Would you like to see him do that? Do you have any indication that that's going to happen?
Well, you know, I'm not in the business of giving advice to my friend Joe Biden, President Biden. He was very gracious when I was prime minister and invited me over. I'm sure there's, technicalities, and at some point, Prime Minister Netanyahu will be invited.
And very briefly, Speaker McCarthy is going to be in Israel. What do you want to hear from him? What message do you hope to hear from the Speaker?
That America and Israel remain best friends, and we share not only interests, but the same shared values of democracy, of freedom, of strength against evil, and that we're as strong as ever together.
And have you felt that way under the Biden administration very quickly?
Actually, I have. I have to say, while we do have some disagreements, the Biden administration has been extremely friendly with the state of Israel, and at all levels, cooperation is as strong as ever.
Prime Minister Bennett, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Great being here.
Really appreciate it. And thank you for being here with us. Chuck will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.